are talking Ouija Castle, also known as Sleeping Beauty's Massacre. And this is directed and produced by Louisa Warren, who recently brought us Cinderella's Curse. Interestingly, on IMDb, Scott Jeffrey, aka Scott Chambers, of course responsible for the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey movies, is actually listed as a producer. But I did check the credits on the actual movie, and he isn't actually listed on the credits on the actual film, so he may or may not be involved. Regardless, this is a horror version of that classic fairy tale, and you can say that the Grimm fairy tales are actually a little bit dark when you look at the original tellings of them, but maybe not dark as this, let me just say. So the story is, it's a broad retelling of the Sleeping Beauty story with extra horror elements. We have a kind of fantasy kingdom, a period piece, where the queen of the kingdom wants her son to get married because the king is dead, and she needs the son to be married, to have an heir, to continue the lineage, etc. And the queen wants her son to marry someone who has noble lineage, but he's actually in love with a commoner who has no sort of prestige in her name, so to speak. And this witch who's in the the queen of another kingdom wants the prince to marry her daughter to gain power, etc. So she puts this Thalia, who is this commoner that the prince is in love with, in a kind of magical trance, and as such tries to marry off her daughter to the prince. In the meantime, she's kind of killing people to kind of cover her tracks. We get the Sleeping Beauty being raped by a kind of servant within the house, and whole lots of gory stuff happen. What will happen with this movie's plot? You have to watch it and find out. So let us discuss. Now, this is quite similar to the movie Cinderella's Curse, which is also directed by Louisa Warren, and I had a suspicion it might have been filmed back to back. We do have a lot of kind of Scott Jeffrey regulars in here, including Chrissy Wooner and the like. What can we say on the plus column with this one? Now, having had seen the Cinderella's Curse movie, that was fairly hardcore. And this one is probably even more hardcore than the Cinderella's Curse. I mean, let me just say, some of the delights that you may have that are all done sort of practically. You will get people's faces getting peeled off. You will get babies getting chopped up and put in a cooking pan. You will get various kind of, decapitations and torture. You will get people raped in their sleep, things like this. So this movie has a dark past, let me just say. I mean, it's not massively explicit. A lot of this stuff is suggested, and some of it we see off screen, but some of it we do see, and there is a reasonable amount of practical VFX on display here. And I will say, I actually think for a low budget movie, the VFX are actually done to a fairly kind of good standard. I mean, we're not talking a major Hollywood production here, but for an independently produced low-budget British horror film, I've got to say I thought the effects work was pretty good. So, if you like gore, although I wouldn't say this is like a splatter movie exactly, there are certainly some very dark and adult themes, and some fairly decent practical gore effects here. So that was all pretty good. They've stayed away from the kind of the CGI gore and stuff like that, which is good stuff. I'd also say as well, even though it's certainly not perfect, the production here using this kind of these older buildings and things like that, and you know, trying to kind of disguise the fact that it's clearly kind of got modern piping and things in it, but, you know, and stuff like the costume design. There's an attempt here to kind of make this look like a, you know, a period fantasy setting. It's not entirely successful, but again, we do have to kind of factor in the actual kind of budget here. And the movie certainly ends with a little bit of a bang. We have, without want to spoil anything for you here, but we do have a sort of Carrie-esque scene towards the end, which actually is very, very similar, I have to say, to Cinderella's Curse. I mean, outside of the elements that are unique to each story, I actually have to say I think the broad strokes of the story are very similar to Cinderella's Curse. So do bear that in mind. But I have to say, you know, for certainly a very dark take on this kind of fairy tale, you know, it still does have elements of that kind of classic story. You know, there are certainly, it is catering towards, I think, you know, a horror crowd, but also who likes a little bit of kind of romance and sugar as well, maybe. So, is that you? Should you ask that question? You know, there you go. So yeah, it's a kind of a mishmash between a classic story and a very hardcore horror film with some quite extreme themes in it. The acting is a mixed bag, I will say. You know, there's characters here who I think do a better job than others. Some I think are quite fun in this kind of slightly campy role, to be fair. But it is a mixed bag. So let's just move on to what doesn't work. The acting is a mixed bag. The acting isn't brilliant from everyone. There are certain performances that I think do stand out. Some as better, some as kind of not so good. And most are kind of somewhat in the kind of a campy, I guess it is going to be a fairy tale range, but yeah, a mixed bunch of acting here. There are some sort of decisions. Bear in mind this is a lower budget movie, like I've said. But there are things like our kind of Sleeping Beauty, for some reason, is wearing quite an awful wig. I just don't know why. I mean, I had to look at the actress. She's a brunette in actual life. But she's wearing this kind of blonde wig. I mean, just have Sleeping Beauty be a brunette. And I'm pretty sure she was. I'm not really familiar with the kind of fairy tales, but I'm fairly sure Sleeping Beauty was a brunette in some of the stories at the very least. But anyway, it's a horrible wig. And there are, as I've mentioned, a few sort of things that betray it's obviously clearly in the actual modern period, including various kind of like piping and aerials and stuff on some of the externals, and you know, modern kind of bits of costuming. Again, you can be a little bit sort of forgiving because it is a lower budget movie. I think some of the pacing is a little bit hit and miss. There are periods here where I do feel the movie kind of meanders, and there are takes where I think it's just too long and we needed to have a cut or a kind of transition into a different scene. So you do feel this movie sort of, its pacing is a little bit mixed as it goes on. As the film gets into the kind of the third act, it's really pretty much brutal for the rest of the whole third act. But until we kind of get there, there are sequences here that I just felt could have been a little bit more going on, a little bit more kind of, you know, trimmed down and things like that. It's not a particularly long film. I just think some of the pacing here is uneven. The level of brutality in this movie, you could argue this movie might be even border on being a bit mean-spirited. The rape stuff and the subsequent fate of the baby or babies, it's not quite sure if there's more than one, it seems unnecessary. I mean, it seems like it's in the movie to have it more gratuitous, more shocking, and it is, but I don't know if it really added stuff to the story. We also have some points that I feel are superfluous, like we have our prince wanting to find his sister, and you know, I won't say what happens, but it doesn't really, again, it doesn't really amount to much in regards to story. And we have this kind of like our duo of the kind of the evil witch and her daughter. They just seem to get away with a hell of a lot of stuff pretty easily, you know, without too many kind of questions being asked. The prince himself seems a little bit of a dullard, it must be said. So yeah, it's a kind of a mixed bag, but if you want a hardcore fairy tale, then this is pretty much it. I have to, you know, like I said, some of this stuff is a budgetary issue, so we kind of got to give some leeway with that. But yeah, it's certainly a pretty full-on movie in some respects, but still has the broad story of Sleeping Beauty. 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please do leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.